Welcome to the CROC Podcast.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Here is your host, Dr. E.
Howdy, CROC Nation. Dr. Tommy and Ellie here with you with another great CROC podcast, the first of 2025. Joining me, as always, my loyal and dignified and amazing, intelligent co-host, Professor Angel Santana. Have faith, let it begin. Angel, Happy New Year, buddy.
Happy New Year. The ball has dropped. The new year has sprung. And you know what? Let me tell you something. I don't know about you, but I feel like 2025 is the year. It really, and I mean that. I'm not just saying that to say it. I really believe in my heart we are going to have a fantastic year this year. What do you think?
I think it's absolutely 100% agreed. We are absolutely going to have a rock'em sock'em robot year. And you know why that makes me so happy is because that means that it'll benefit our survivor thrivers. So anytime we obtain any success here on the CROC podcast, it's only success, in order to reach more survivors and help give you the tools, the resources to have a very special and a very unique and successful survivorship journey.
I agree. Here.
So, Angel, I had this thought. So, we were talking before we went live about the last podcast of the year. So that was the story of our friend Mary, the miracle of Mary, right before Christmas. It was just such a touching and wonderful podcast, if I don't mind saying so myself. The feedback we both have received and the response and the impact has been, outstanding and overwhelming. And I have to tell you, being a small grassroots organization in the Hudson Valley and a very small grassroots podcast, the fact that we got such a response, I would have to say that it was probably, if not the most impactful podcast, certainly in the top 5.
I would have to agree. I mean, it was so good that I surprisingly put that on our podcast and have faith that it begin.
Oh, thank you very much. And it got me thinking, and that could sometimes be a dangerous thing, but in this case, I hope it's a good thing because I got an idea. And my idea was if we are going to end our years on the CROC podcast with a medical miracle, a very inspiring story of hope, why don't we start the new year with a bookend and do the exact same thing?
See, that's the beautiful thing about CROC Podcast. So we just don't know what you're going to talk about, but when you do, it's like pulling a cookie out of the cookie jar.
It's absolutely. And I thought, to start the year, a story of hope, a story about redemption, and a story about miracles, medical miracles, just the great interconnectedness we have with each other and the interconnectedness we have with our creator. And I couldn't have thought of a better person to talk about for this first podcast than a patient named Dee. So before we even get to Dee's story, which we will in a minute, I wanted to ask you, Angel, what do you use as your definition for a miracle? You're starting seminary school on Monday. So what better person to ask than my co-host about his definition of what a miracle is?
Yeah, I mean, it's I'm just going to speak right from the heart. I don't want to sound like I'm prepared because
I want that's exactly what I want.
Yeah, I
want your honest, knee-jerk reaction.
Yeah, and I want the audience to hear that because if they're listening to this for the first time, I don't even know what the topics are going to be. So for him to ask me this question, he is really literally giving me this right now. So here we go. The best way that I can describe this answer is this. A miracle is something that we cannot explain. We cannot understand, but we can feel in our hearts spiritually that it's something greater and better beyond from our higher power that is allowing this to come into fruition.
That's a beautiful definition, to be honest with you, because I have the Webster definition, but yours is much better. So the Webster definition is a miracle is an extraordinary event manifesting divine inspiration in human affairs. But I think you said it better, and that's what we're going to go with. I also have a definition, and this would be an extension of the concept of miracle, and that would be miracles in medicine. So we saw a miracle 2 weeks ago, and we're going to see another miracle tonight. And a miracle in medicine is in those rare circumstances, those rare cases when a patient has an unexplainable response or recovery from a fatal disease. And I think that happened with Mary, and I believe that happened with Dee, and we're going to get into it in a second. But before I do, I wanted to ask you, Angel, if you were at a cocktail party, a really high-class cocktail party where they pass around those little hot dogs in a blanket and those scallops wrapped in bacon and those little tiny mini lamb chops. I don't know how old those lambs were that they took those little chops from, and they give you a drink and you sit there and you talk to 100 doctors and you ask 100 doctors if they believe in miracles. How many of them would you believe would believe?
You know, I'm gonna shoot off the hip. I'm gonna say at least 5.
5 out of 100.
I want to say 5 out of 100, but I think the real number would probably be about maybe 2.
Wow. I kind of feel the same way, and I can't speak for anyone else because I personally do believe in miracles. I've witnessed them. Number 2 is I do know some colleagues who do believe in miracles, but I also know many more colleagues who do not. So I believe the reason for this is there's this overwhelming sense of skepticism in medicine, and there's nothing wrong with that in the sense that we all are trained to be skeptical. It's actually healthy to try to keep your mind open to all possibilities. And when people and because I think people maybe overuse the word miracle, and they maybe misuse the word miracle or misrepresent a situation which is really not miraculous and that could be explained medically. So I think all of that, for all of those reasons, I think it's good that the doctors do try to keep their heads on straight and keep that level of that stiff white level of skepticism. But I do think that there is a problem, and I call it the Santa Claus, Tooth Fairy, Easter Bunny phenomenon, where when you're a young doctor or a doctor before we get into medical school, and we're trying to get into medical school, it's the metaphor, the analogy is that of a young child who believes in Santa Claus, who believes in the Easter Bunny, who believes in the Tooth Fairy. And then all of a sudden, sort of as we get older, there's this heaviness around us. It's that heaviness and weight of the non-believers, the people that don't believe that there's a Santa Claus, the people that don't believe there's a Tooth Fairy, the people that don't believe there's an Easter Bunny, and the people that do not believe that miracles are possible. And this weight of the non-believers is way heavier than the weight of the believers. So then you get a group of people, these doctors, who are in training, and the training, I can tell you firsthand, is very rigorous, and it's based on what's called the scientific method. So without getting into too much boring detail, the scientific method just means we do not accept or believe anything unless we prove it scientifically. We prove it through experimentation and the repetitiveness of that experimentation and the careful evaluation of the data to confirm and corroborate that information. So you have that rigorous training, and then you have this hubris. You know what the word hubris means, Angel? It means pride. You're very prideful. So, we're doctors, we go through this rigorous training, we're given great responsibility, and we get this sense of pride. We get the sense of us maybe being better than others, or get the sense that we know more than others. And I always say on the CROC podcast, being a doctor is like, knowing the ending of a mystery novel before you start reading the book, and that kind of gives us this power. And I don't like to call it power. I like to call it this hubris. It's a really good word for this particular situation. And what is really paradoxical about this, and we're going to see paradoxes in a minute, we're usually proven wrong. And I use cosmology slash astronomy as an example. Everyone thinks they know something. So you read a textbook from the 1940s and they talk about, the creation of the world. And then you read a textbook from the 1970s and they say, well, they were wrong in the 1950s. This is how, our world was created. And then a couple of years later, they change it. And then they come up with, the Einsteinian principles of physics and all relativity. And then you have the quantum physicists and everybody's fighting. And then one day everyone thinks they have solved the problem, the God particle and all these other kind of things that they come up with. And we're as far away from knowing what the hell is going on than we were back in the Stone Age, but we still think we're the smartest things since, as my wife would say, a dish of potato chips, which is her favorite food. So it's kind of funny, this hubris that we're not even, we're actually even wrong and we're still prideful. But in any case, the other thing is there's a shift really toward this idol. And I call this idol, the idol of science. So we come in as believers, perhaps, believers in a higher power, in our creator, in our God. And then all of a sudden we go to medical school and get all this training and we start shifting our belief system to that of science over the possibility that there is a higher purpose or a higher power or a creator. And then that bright light, that blinding light of learning becomes so incandescent and so loud that we forgot what we learned on the first day of anatomy lab. So you walk into the anatomy lab and you have this cadaver, and the cadaver represents the whole, right? The whole of a person, not the soul of a person, but the whole of a person. And you have to, carefully and methodically dissect the cadaver so you can understand the what I call the macro, meaning the big picture of the human body. And then we look at all of these tissues under the microscope, and we call that histology. And then we read about these books based on biochemistry and molecular biology, and we look at the micro environments of our body. So we look at the macro environment, which is the cadaver, the anatomy lab. We look at the micro, which is the histology, the biochemistry, the molecular biology. And then we get into the engineering of how this all works. So you take you have the muscles and the nerves and the bones and the brain, and you put it all together with, how the workings of the body with all of these, these disciplines put together, and you come up with, how we view the workings of the human body and how these workings can become deviant and pathological, and how we as healers have to interject ourselves in trying to manage those dysfunctions. And in my impression, my opinion is that first day of the anatomy lab was not only the first day of my passion for doing what I do, but it did not make me stray from my beliefs in a higher power, in my God. It actually strengthened them. And what I did was I didn't turn away from the possibility of miracles, because I believe that being able to study the human body is a privilege. And when I say learning, I'm talking about a rigorous, intense, program of basically taking apart the human body and putting it back together. And to me, that was the proof that not that there was not a God or that there was not a possibility of a miracle, but the opposite, or at least the possibility that miracles can happen, which I think is a nice segue to D. So before I get into the patient, Angel, any thoughts on the content so far?
I think it's amazing that you can actually look at this and say, that it was a privilege. Most people would just say, I was meant to do this. I was born to do this. But the fact that you're able to say, look, this was a gift. And I think that it goes hand in hand with the word miracle. So we started with the word miracle. We're talking about a gift that you've been provided, and it just holds each other's hands.
Yeah, I agree entirely. So, when I first met Dee, she was your typical standard, middle-aged single mom of four children. We live in Middletown, New York here in the Hudson Valley. It's unfortunately a socioeconomically depressed area, with people with a lot of health disparities and issues. And that was certainly the case with Dee. She was socioeconomically disadvantaged. She was biased by being of color. She was also disadvantaged by her mental health comorbidities, meaning she had some other, stuff going on the psychiatric side. And then again, we talk about this all the time, the healthcare disparities for those that have not, right? So not the people that have the resources, the best insurance, the people who have access to all this healthcare and the best healthcare in the world. I'm talking about the least of our brothers, the people that do not have this access. So we call that a healthcare disparity, and also a lack of proper mental health resources, which is ubiquitous everywhere where there's such a dearth of these resources. You get a patient who's in big trouble. So she had these symptoms for a while. She did not get it taken care of or get, help, because not only did she have not access to this care, she also basically had a distrust, an understandable distrust of our system. So when she finally did get diagnosed with this brain tumor and they did the biopsy, it turned out to be, the worst cancer you can get. Now, we talked about Mary's anaplastic thyroid cancer, which is the worst, and I think glioblastoma is the worst. So I would say it's a tie, right? So if you're a New Yorker, I hope you love the Yankees as much as you love the Mets, but maybe love the Mets just a tiny bit more. But anyway, it's kind of a tie between those two for the worst cancers. And of course, Dee got this terrible brain tumor. And because of her distrust, understandable distrust, she delayed her entry to care. So what ends up happening, she stays in the community, she gets a biopsy, she doesn't have the surgery she needs, because we just couldn't do it in the community. And lo and behold, she comes to see me and she's a mess. So the first level of challenge that I had with Dee was actually getting her to trust me. Because there was there was this obvious difference in our skin color and an obvious difference in our, I guess, availability to resources. You have me as a privileged, white dude, who's educated and, has pretty much everything I could possibly want. And then you have Dee, who has to probably struggle just to get food on the table. And I'm sure there's some bad feelings, just in general about, all this racial tension or whatever that we see in our society. And it took a long time. It took over a month just to get her to open herself up to the possibility of care. So you start the trust by just letting the patient put the boundaries up of what they're comfortable with. So the first thing was how we addressed her. She wanted to be addressed a certain way. She wanted the proper respect. She wanted only the people that she was familiar with. So there was our nurse Marie, who just started her first week of retirement, and she was with me. And Marie and I became the only two people that she would literally talk to. If one of the nurse practitioners who are outstanding came into the room, if one of our outstanding nurses came into the room, if one of our outstanding, therapists come out of the room, Dee would summarily kick them out of the room. Like, what are you doing? Get out of here. I'm only talking to Ian Ellie and I'm only talking to Marie. That's the only people I'm talking to. So it took a month to get that, to get to the point where I talked her into getting at least some kind of treatment. So the first thing I talked her into was to go to Memorial for a second opinion. I'm a very big fan of Dr. Jacqueline Stone and the neuro-oncology guys down there. Her team down there are wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And, and Dr. Stone said, you know what, Dee, you might be able to have this surgery after all. I know that they didn't want to do it in the community, but maybe we do this. But then we hit a second roadblock. So what happened was that month that I needed, to gain her trust would have been needed also at Memorial. So she would have had to pick her point people and, gain, and that would have taken too long. So what we all decided to do was we decided to just get her on some kind of treatment, and we started her on chemotherapy and radiation therapy. So it was solid treatment for sure, but we would have preferred to have had her had the surgery if it wasn't for all of these other extraneous issues. Now, Angel, we're going to talk about the anatomy of a miracle, and I'll start with the first ingredient, sort of like making a chocolate chip cookie. So the first ingredient is I call the expectation of failure. And what that means, it's a necessary component and environment to have everyone believe that the patient's going to die. So it's this expectation that they're going to fail before you even gave one rad of radiation or one molecule of chemotherapy. It's just no one believes that this case is going to be anything but fatal. So that's the first ingredient you need to make your chocolate chip miracle. And then the first miracle happened. The miracle was getting her through treatment, and we actually got her through treatment. It was not easy, and it took a lot of TLC, and it took a lot of energy, and it took a lot of special, mechanisms that we set up for her to do this, but she got through her treatment. And when the patient finished, she did well for a couple of weeks, and then she crashed. And that's the moment in the movie, the John Wayne movie, when the wagons are circling and there's all of these screaming Indians coming down, from the hills with their arrows and their spears and whatnot, and they're coming with their knives and scalping all the people and all that kind of stuff. And then the cavalry comes. You hear the trumpet, and then you see all of these dudes in blue uniforms and coming with their guns, and then they come and they rescue them. So it's this moment of, oh my God, what we thought was going to happen is happening. The patient is crashing. Duh. That's exactly what we expected. So that's your second ingredient. The patient had these symptoms. She was crashing. We got some x-rays. We got an MRI. And it looked to us, believe it or not, after 8 weeks of radiation and chemotherapy, it not only didn't look like the tumor responded, it actually looked like the tumor got worse. So we call that pseudo progression. So you can't really tell whether a patient has responded and has changes from the treatment, or whether indeed there's still residual cancer. But of course, we had this absolute belief that what we think is the obvious blocks our brains from open-minded and creative thinking. And that's the way we were trained, to be open-minded and creative when we look at a patient or look at a challenge. And that's the paradox, is that we kind of regress to this very infantile, immature human, because doctors are human. It's almost like in a Twilight Zone episode where everyone thinks there's Martians on the street, but there's really not. And everybody starts to panic and go crazy. And it turns out to be like, a dog pulling a wagon or something like that. It's not an alien at all. And then the next ingredient is our panic. We just kind of touched on that a minute ago. And that panic, when we panic, oh my God, this patient's crashing and they're doing terrible, and the cancer is growing and it didn't respond. And that's infectious. That just becomes like just a personal panic, could then create a mob panic. And then we have this preconceived notion of failure. And we threw the patient back to Memorial. We didn't want to deal with it. We referred the patient for specialized treatment with protons. We sent the patient to have surgery to just clean out the mess. And the last ingredient is when everyone gives up except one person, and that's the patient. That's the only person who still has hope. And that's the last ingredient for that chocolate chip cookie of miracle. And lo and behold, Angel, the patient had surgery. They threw the lump of that massive gunk on a pathology slab. They cut it up into little pieces, and he looked at it under the microscope, and guess what? There was zero cancer. It was all post-treatment, dead cells. They cleaned her out. They put her back together. And guess what? Now time has passed. She's back to her life. She's enjoying her children. She has basically come full circle. And Angel, I'm going to end there and let you comment on this medical miracle of a patient that we call D.
You know, they say that when you think about miracles, you always think it has something to do with the things that we've done in our lifetime. Yeah, that God chooses, to certain people to create miracles. That's not the case. Miracles happen because they just happen. We will never be able to explain it. We can't predict it. But what we can say is when we're surrounded or witness or bear witness to a miracle, we have to step back and say, wow, what a great experience. Wow, there is something greater and more powerful. Wow, what is that person going to do with the extra time in their life to provide others? Well, you know what she's done for us? By having that miracle, it allows you, Dr. E, and others to bear witness to a miracle and to share it amongst those all over the world so that we can provide proof that miracles do happen.
Absolutely. Thank you, Angel, for that closing comment. I just want to take this moment and wish everyone, all of our survivor thrivers, all of our healthcare practitioners who listen to our podcast, a happy new year. I love this bookend. I love these themes of medical miracles. They do happen. I know that many of us do not believe in miracles. Many of us are searching for other explanations to things that happened to Mary and things that happened to patients like D. And that's fine. But from my point of view, from the CROC Nation, from the CROC Podcast, from the Citizens Reunited to Overcome Cancer organization, miracles do happen. So when our survivor thriver goes into an office and is told they have 6 months to live, or is told that they have an unbeatable cancer, or are told that they're just not going to do well, I want you to take these moments, I want you to take these examples as examples of hope for you, as examples of a life vest, a buoy to help you through those swells of pessimism and those swells of nihilism and those swells of non-positivity and disbelief in what you can do and what our Creator can do through you. And I wanted you to keep that in your memory, in your mind, and have faith and have hope. So I'm going to end this podcast, as I do each and every one, with a blessing. And that blessing is to wish all of our survivor thrivers a long, healthy, happy, and cancer-free life. God bless you. God be with you. Peace.
Hey, CROC Nation. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the podcast to your friends. Visit our website, crocvip.com. We would love to hear your feedback.